My addiction was training, and then it was managing my weight, and then I ended up with an eating disorder, ended up with anxiety, depression, and ended up trying to take my own life because I was just so over fixated on proving myself.
Today's guest is Kieran O'Neill, former international boxer on the men's England team, turned mental performance coach and consultant.
I always had like this sort of burning ambition of, I've got to win, I've got to go to the next league, I've got to go to the next level. Men can fight and make money and have six packs. That's what men do.
Kieran is the founder of Total Mental Performance, or TMP. He works one-to-one with entrepreneurs, executives, and high net worth individuals to help them think, feel, and perform on an entirely different level. Kieran has been diagnosed with 99th percentile ADHD, meaning that he's quote unquote more ADHD than 99% of people with ADHD. And his journey to where he is right now has been far from a straight line. We're talking boxing at an international level, closing over 400 grand's worth of software sales, battling eating disorders, addiction, depression, and burnout. And you're also going to learn a fantastic frame that he gives, which is called the ADHD stop price. So if you're an ADHD entrepreneur that's trying to figure out how you can stop swimming against the tide and actually build a successful business around how your brain actually works, then this one's for you.
Kieran, thank you for being here today. I'm very excited for this conversation. It is one that's been in the works for a good couple of months now, and I think we're going to cover a lot of ground. So let me start off by asking you a question that is hopefully going to give the audience a little bit of context around who you are and what it is that you do. So to my understanding, you were an international boxer on England's men's team before building the company that you have now, TMP, which is Total Mental Performance. So give me an understanding as to how did you go from boxing in the ring to coaching ambitious entrepreneurs around mental performance? Run me through that journey, if you will.
Yeah. If we look back at the core, I don't know, the origin story, as a kid, I had undiagnosed ADHD, which I know what this podcast is all about. And I always had this question, which was, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? Why am I not like my peers? Why am I not like everyone else? Why can't I sit still? Why do I want to try everything? Why can't I just sit down and concentrate? I used to stand up in exams. I'd be in an exam room or in a hall, and I'd just stand up and start walking around, and I'd get told off. And I think in year 3, I set off a fire alarm because I was that bored in the exam. It was pretty intense. So I always had this question, what's wrong with me? Going into boxing when I was 12 was a way of validating, oh, I am enough, I am worthy. Because, you know, what do young kids or boys and men look up to? Men that can fight, men that can make money. And, you know, boxing was an extension of that. So, yeah, if you look at boxing, it's a high performance sport. It's a high performance sport. It's all about how can you get the extra 1 to 5% to get the most out of you. So when you have a fundamental core belief of I'm broken and thus not good enough, and then you find something that can give you instant feedback as to whether you're good enough or not, air quote, that was very alluring. That was very, very alluring. So yeah, I'd spent, I'm going to say 10 years in that pursuit, just boxing and fighting. And I loved the game, absolutely loved the game. But I took things to extreme, and you see this a lot of ADHDers. They pick up addictions. So my addiction was training, and then it was managing my weight. And then I ended up with an eating disorder, ended up with anxiety, depression, and ended up trying to take my own life because I was just so over fixated on proving myself with boxing. And I never got to the levels that I wanted. I barely kept my place on the England team. Found I was always just underweight and starving and putting so much pressure on myself. I never really performed. That was probably a talent thing too. So on England, think of that as championship football. If you think of Team GB, that's Premiership. I was probably lower league championship football in terms of my talent, but probably could have played in the Prem if I looked after myself and if I had a different frame and perspective on my career. But I was kind of just going all in. On the side, so when I was 16, I went to a school with a guy called Peter Jones. So he's on Dragon's Den for any American listeners. It's Shark Tank over in the States. And he had a school. So I went to the school, and they taught you about business and how to set up and run businesses. And it was great. I was the youngest kid on the course. Absolutely loved it. So by the time I'd graduated, I'd met a guy in there who owned a company, and he put me into software sales. So I'm 17, 18, playing virtual reality education simulators. Sold nothing for my first year, then closed over 400K. So I always had like this sort of burning ambition of, I've got to win. I've got to go to the next league. I've got to go to the next level. Men can fight and make money and have six packs. That's what men do. And I took that literally. There was no Andrew Tate back then. There was no real people like that. I took that literally. So after the boxing and I burnt out, and I'd made enough money through commission to actually go all in and train full time, I reached this point where it wasn't working. And we tried to run a business, me and one of my best friends, a nutrition app for boxers, raised 15K from one of my sponsors. And I said, look, I'll pay you back if I lose it all. Lost it all, ended up in debt on my auntie's sofa in a 1-bedroom council flat in Kennington, South London. So it was a real, like, just this whirlwind of impulsivity and just trying and trying and trying and trying and trying. Then I went back into software sales for a few years and made some decent money. Life was good. Spent my whole life just closing software deals and partying over in Ibiza, around Europe. And that was a really simple existence, but I was very anxious. And once I'd cleared off the debt and I'd saved up enough cash, I was like, I don't really care anymore. Like, I don't care about this. Like, who cares if anybody buys data analytics softwares for luxury brands? No one gives a shit. My contribution to the world is helping people buy more luxury goods, and through data analytics and marketing. Who cares? So, kind of similar to before, where I earned enough from my sales through commission and saving and being disciplined. I just took, I think it was a year and a half out just to study. So I was studying NLP, I studied cognitive hypnotherapy, studied performance coaching, and that's all I did. I just studied and studied and studied. I did over 100 hours unpaid coaching and therapy with clients. Then they started paying me. And then I realized it was the ambitious clients I loved working with because they have similar values to me, which is what's the next league, what's the next level. So I just kept attacking and attacking and attacking and going and going and going and loving the work and just fell in love with it. And then I got invited to a speaking gig. I think 5 years now. I think 5. I'm in my 6th year in Dubai, right around COVID. Did a speaking gig. Half of the room signed up with me as clients. I packed for 4 days. And then UAE got put on the red list. So I couldn't fly home. Now, I was a single man at the time. It was just me and my laptop and my clients online. So I was like, all right, I'll stay for Q1 until this blows over. And here I am maybe 6 years later, still here. And that's really it. That's the journey of where it all started. That took me into where I am now. And so what I'm doing now is I've obviously got Total Mental Performance. I've got a team of coaches in there working with clients one-to-one. We've got an education arm. So that was new. That kicked off Q4 last year. So it's teaching people how to coach mental performance. So it's working not only on productivity and performance and the structures and the tools to help get more out of your mind, but it's dealing with the more emotional layer, the more psychological layer of what's holding individuals back, which I think just comes back to the question of why do I feel so broken and wrong, which is why I did a lot of therapy to get to that toolkit that then led me to study as a therapist to then unpack that. And yeah, today I'm working with business owners, entrepreneurs, execs, high net worths, really to help them think, feel, and perform on another league at another level. Half of that is through performance and productivity. Half of that's through doing the deep inner work, the emotional limiting beliefs and the trauma, capital T trauma or little t trauma, the little moments that created those doubts, those fears, that emotional inefficiency, to help them shift that so they can go up a league and up a level. And that's it. That's how we landed here.
One hell of a journey. And I'm looking forward to kind of poking a little bit deeper into the current setup that you have and the current practice that you give to these high performing entrepreneurs, some of the tactics and strategies you use. But before we dive into that, I just want to take it back to something that I remember seeing online that I think you've been pretty open about, which is the fact that you've been diagnosed with the 99th percentile ADHD, which to my understanding means that you're quote unquote more ADHD than 99% of people with ADHD. Correct me if I've got that wrong. But when you received that diagnosis, and I'm also curious as to when that point was, did that change or reframe anything for you if you were to like look back and connect the dots? Because I know for me, when I turned back around at like my life, especially school years, which were incredibly challenging for myself, highly resonate a lot with what you're saying there, from having challenges at school to being hyper obsessed with health and fitness, kind of getting body dysmorphia, suicidal ideation at certain points. But there seems to be a very common thread with a lot of people that I speak to amongst those kind of channels. I'm curious to hear that experience for you. Did a lot kind of click and make sense? What was that overarching feeling? If you can share any thoughts on that.
You know, mate, that was like, people talk about finding God. Like they have a moment where they feel like they found God and everything makes sense. That's what that felt like for me. Like it really, it really just cracked everything open for me, like absolutely everything, because that fundamental question of what's wrong with me, why do I feel so broken, why can't I do things like everyone else? But that question is like a double-edged sword. There's a negative part to that, but there's also a positive part of that. The darker the shadow, the brighter the light, and vice versa. um I think that was it. It was, that's why. That makes so much sense. And I forgave myself. I remember meditating at one point. I'm not really a big meditator, but I remember doing it around that time. And I remember I was just in there and I just realized I forgave myself for all of the judgment, all of the shame, all of the um, doubts, fears, insecurities, self-judgment. I was just able to forgive myself. And it was from that point. It was a very rocky ride. It wasn't just easy from there. But that's when I started becoming my own best friend. And when you can become your own best friend, you finish off your journals with, I love you, mate. You can get things wrong and you know when to give yourself a kick up the arse, but you don't stamp on yourself while you're on the floor. You put your arm around yourself. You go, okay, come on then, let's go again. So it was the most illuminating realization for me. And back in 2019, it was Dr. Pablo Jimenez that diagnosed me. He said, Kieran, over in the States, they're miles ahead in terms of diagnosis, but over here I was in London at the time, over here in England, like we're a little bit behind. Like it's estimated to 1% to 2% of the population have ADHD, yet the diagnosis rate is well below 1%. So there are hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people walking around without a diagnosis. Then social media came along and, 2-3 years ago, it's where things really kicked off and everybody started going, it's not just me. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Now it's become a bit of a meme. Some people are piss takers. Oh, everybody's got ADHD these days. Yeah, maybe. But I think for me, I just went research mode, started reading papers, started reading books, started reading studies. One of the beauties of this neurological wiring is you can just hyper focus. So, I'd spend like 4 or 5 hours just reading on this and enjoying that and allowing myself to get lost in the research. What's funny was this plays a lot into my performance coaching. I suspect it was probably the same thing for you, Jack, which is you were trying to figure out what made you tick. You were trying to figure out how you could manage your symptoms, and through training, through nutrition, through structure, through productivity, through all of that, for you trying to fix your own struggles, fears and doubts and all of that, you then realize, when I apply this to neurotypical people, they experience just as good, if not better results as well. So when I look at that, and I've had coaches in my corner, like mentors, performance coaches, therapists, business mentors since about 14. So just for years and years and years, I've just been downloading and listening and learning. And I think it was almost like a spiritual, psychological, chiropractic readjustment. It was just like oh, that makes so much sense. So yeah, that was my experience. It was a very positive experience. To get diagnosed in your 20s instead of as a child, I think has its pros and its cons. Its pros are you've survived up until that point, which is great. But at the same time, might have been a bit helpful if I'd had that diagnosis in my childhood to understand that's why I am like I am. But it couldn't have been any other way, because if it could have been, it would have been, but it wasn't. So you just gotta love that, own it, and move forward,
Yeah, mate, I totally get that. Very similar experience for myself. Fortunate enough to go through that process, relatively earlier in life, really, if we relative to like general age. I know a lot of people that, let's say, find themselves getting diagnosed now in their 40s. I think the feeling seems to be very different, and it's more like grieving a life that they wish that they could have had if they'd have known of this sooner. So I do feel very fortunate that in my earlier years, let's say, i.e. my 20s, I have come to this realization and had this breakthrough, really, which for me was experiencing the exact same way to yourself. Because if I look back at my earlier years, I have literally vocalized out loud to myself, what the fuck is wrong with me? And like, why is my brain broken? I can recall numerous occasions where I have genuinely said that aloud to myself with no one else present, for, again, a number of different reasons. And I just couldn't make sense of why I was feeling the way I was at that point in time, why I found seemingly simple tasks to be so difficult to do. And again, this is both like personal relations and business context. And I was like, why is this so hard? Yet I was acutely aware that I had this other side to me that had this capability to, as you said, hyper focus and work on something that was interesting to me for 18 hours nonstop. I had a really high tolerance for like stress, resilience. I could, outwork most people. And obviously you ride that way for a long time until you realize that actually shouldn't be worn as a badge of honor and doesn't get you to the places you want to get to. Again, you have to learn all these lessons through going through the fire, but I knew that there was a duality to it. And I just couldn't make sense of it at the time. And as soon as I came to that realization, it was genuinely, without it sounding too trite, life-changing, because I was able to look back over my shoulder and connect all of the dots at so many different points in my own journey and in my own life, from the complexities kind of internally that I felt in school, probably about the age of 14, where I was really depressed and kind of going through that suicidal ideation. And that was just purely because I had this emotional turbulence that I couldn't understand, which, as we know, with people who have this brain type, the emotional dysregulation is very prevalent. And that's probably one of the points where I look back and think, I wish, not even necessarily myself, because I don't know if I'd have known that I had ADHD at that point, I don't know if I would have known what that meant or what to do with it. I wish someone else knew, because they would have been able to guide me without even telling me, this is what you are. Because that was a big challenge for me. And I'm curious if you've had experiences like that, if you look back now, because I didn't have anybody around me that had any knowledge of what this was, whether that be in the infrastructure of the school I went to or my parents, which again, they've not been educated. So that's not on them. I didn't have the tools, and that then just was a slippery slope for myself. Do you have any experience that's kind of similar to that? It sounds like you do, where you think, you know what, that's probably a point in my life that I would have benefited from having some form of external structure or know-how that could have guided me through that.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say couldn't have been any other way, because if it was, it would have been, and it wouldn't. And you just can't change that. What was interesting was when we gave the forms to my parents to fill out, and my ex-partner at the time to fill out, and a couple of my best friends. My mum said, "Yeah, the school did mention something." And I went, "Okay." Then what happened? She said, "I didn't want them to put you on drugs, so I didn't go ahead and proceed with the diagnosis." I was really angry. I remember being really angry about that. I was like, "It could have saved me like so much stress and chaos and panic." But at the same time, like, you just don't know if that's true or not. Might not have been true. Maybe they would have put me on the medication, and that would have created some other health issues or some other challenges too. And also, every human being on the planet is doing the best with what they have at any moment. And that's something you learn as a therapist. It's like unconditional positive regard, for everyone. So my mum is thinking, I don't want him to go on mind altering drugs as a child, young child. Um, she's protecting me, right? So uh, after I'd calmed down and I'd reflected, I kind of released that and went, you know what, my life could have been very different in a good way. I could have been something completely different. We just don't know. So for me, like, the first thing I did as soon as I got the diagnosis was I went and hired an ADHD coach, and we used to speak on the phone once a week for 40 minutes, and he was just helping me come to terms with what this thing is and how it shows up. Just dived into books. The Drummer in the Great Mountain, phenomenal book, life-changing book, one of the best books I ever read for myself personally on ADHD. Yeah, like there were so many things, man. ADHD, I struggle with addiction. There was various different addictions I struggled with as a teenager and in my 20s that I never got a handle on. I did get a handle on, but probably took me until probably my late 20s before. And even then, like, addiction now comes in and comes out. But in my teens, in particular, my early 20s, like a lot of partying. Partying until I was about 22. A lot of boxing. Boxing was an addiction. Food was an addiction. Training in it was an addiction. Work was an addiction. And then later came partying, alcohol, and drugs. Because I'd kind of missed out, whilst I was working on senior software projects, missed out on the university years where everybody would go out and party. So I thought, all right, we've got to try and catch up now. Armed with some commission, it was pretty dangerous, to be honest. Would I have liked a mentor that could have just sat me down and just sort of said, "Hey, chill out. Here's how your brain works." Absolutely. I had a boxing coach called Martin Calvert, passed away. I think you know Louis, Louis's uncle. Changed our lives. Absolutely changed our lives. I always reference him. He was the first person outside of, like, I could listen to And he'd say, just hit these pads, right? Don't worry about everything else. Just focus on this bit because you can focus on this bit. And if you do really well, you'll be able to leave this town. If you're able to do even better, we'll take you all over the country. If you do even better, we'll be able to take you around the world. I was like, wow, okay. So he helped me, but it was never, you've got ADHD, that's what it is. Most combat athletes, not most, a lot of combat athletes have ADHD. And I think they're drawn to those sports because you don't have a choice but to be present. In a football pitch, your mind can wander. In like marathon running and those sorts of things, your mind can really wander. But when you've got an opponent trying to take your head off, you don't really have a choice. So you just hyper focus and you lock in, and then you look up and you've been in the gym for 2.5 hours and you haven't drunk anything or eaten anything. So yeah, I think finding my way into boxing probably was the thing. Like, that was where I found the mentors that helped me. And then I worked with therapists, sports psychologists, performance coaches, business mentors, for sales mentors. So I have always, just from my boxing experience, always just put really serious, seasoned and experts around me, because it just saved me a lot of pain and chaos and destruction. And then once I got the diagnosis, everyone in my personal life went, oh, that was obvious. I'm like, what do you mean that was obvious? It's like, oh, no, now you mention it. Like, oh, that makes total sense. And I was like, yeah, we always wondered. I'm like, you always wondered, why didn't you say something? And I didn't want to offend you because you're quite sensitive. And I'm like, what do you mean I'm sensitive? And then away we go. And that was that. So yeah, you'll probably resonate with a lot of that.
Yeah,
sure.
undoubtedly. Those that are frequent listeners of the podcast will know that I had a similar moment. The actual reason as to why I started the journey of exploring this as an option was because my now fiance and my mum were talking. I think we were out for dinner or something like that. And they were like, oh yeah, he's got something all right. Like, he's got some things going on up there, and he always has. Like, I've again found out later in life that I had tics when I was younger around like food, and I had obsessive behavior and very addictive behavior. I was very, very curious and very kind of like sensitive as a child as well, and like hyper aware of everything, which kind of made me quite emotional. Like my mum, I remember tells me this story, and it has fondness in telling anybody that she meets this story of how, like, when she was driving around a multi-story car park and I'm freaking out as a child, and we're talking like 3, because I'm like, you can't park here. Like, the police will come and they'll arrest us because you're not allowed to park in this spot. And it would just consume me. And again, that's that kind of hyper awareness and sensitivity, and that dysregulation was interesting. Yeah, they both were like, oh yeah, like he's obviously got something. And this was total news to me. I was like, what do you mean I've got something? And that's then what led to the conversation a couple of weeks later with myself and my partner. And I was like, do you remember that conversation that you had with my mum where you were both like pretty adamant that I've got something cooking upstairs? She was like, yeah, like it's pretty obvious. And I, again, remember exactly where we were. We were in a garden centre, and I got my phone out, and I just, while we were having tea and cake, British as that sounds, I was looking
Tea and
through
cake
the
at a garden centre, yeah. Looking
literally.
at flowers, looking at all the roses and the
That's
lilies.
culture.
Nice.
That is.
Yeah,
That's culture.
yeah, you're cultured, mate. I like it.
And I just got the kind of generic list up of ways that it, the disposition almost. And I was like, I pretty much tick all of these. And that it was from that moment on when I went through a very similar journey to yourself of just hyper focusing on going through the studies, going through everything, challenging my ideas as well. So I almost took everything verbatim to begin with and just like got into like research collection mode, and then held them up and was like, do I believe in this narrative? I can believe in the science, but there's often a story that is then attached to it, and started then challenging it. And that's when I've gone down this really interesting avenue of evolutionary mismatch theory, and understanding that, like, my belief at present is around the fact that there's an environmental mismatch for a lot of individuals. And that's why the symptoms are feeling very rife at the moment, because a large portion of people with this brain type are not in the environment that means that the brain can thrive within, which, again, to your point there, is why I believe so many people who have this brain type gravitate towards arts and creativity of some form, whether that be theatre, actual art itself, the military, and entrepreneurship and sports. And I believe that it's kind of like that example of, I speak to clients about this quite frequently. People often think, they look at Michael Phelps, for example, and they go, oh, if I swim, I'm going to get a body like Michael Phelps. It's like, actually, Michael Phelps swims because and he's a very good swimmer because he has his body. And it's actually, we get that conflated as the wrong way around. And I think that's, again, similar, is that a lot of people with this brain type are in business because the idea of business is highly desirable for them. And that's why we kind of a lot of people congregate, aware or not, within these areas. And again, that's a double-edged sword. It can be incredibly powerful, but also if unmanaged and don't have the right structures and systems in place, can be very destructive. Now, I'm curious, where were you in your journey? And what I mean by that is in your, let's say, entrepreneurial journey. At what milestone were you at when you had the diagnosis? And I'm curious, again, did that change immediately for you what those next steps were? Because I know you mentioned you obviously took a year out. Was that as a result of, and where were you at that point?
Yeah, I was still in software sales. And what I realized was I've always coached and mentored in various different ways, whether that's boxers or younger boxers or the juniors in the sales team, or leading a small sales team and helping them. And I was kind of coming to the realizations I actually enjoy teaching these guys how to book meetings and close deals more than I do actually closing the deals. This is more fun and engaging. So I was already getting an inkling. And I've always liked helping people. I've always loved people. I'm always fascinated by people. Boxing and software sales is just an observation of the human being in front of you and understanding what makes them tick and what their desires are. In boxing, you're trying to ultimately dismantle them. So you're using psychology and you're trying to suss out your opponent, right? Straight from the moment you walk into the venue for the weigh-in, you're already playing that game and you're trying to understand, and it's the whole thing, right? So that's all psychology and understanding people. Software sales is really understanding what does this person and what does this organization want to achieve? What are the blockers and the problems? And do I have the appropriate solution to help them solve that problem and get the outcome that they're looking for? And there's two parts. There's the business case and then there's the individual. So you're sussing out, is there a business case? If there is a business case, away you go. Otherwise you get out. Same with the person. Is this person the right person, and are they the right culture fit? And then you've got all the other various different mechanisms of that. So that was all like psychology and people and all of that anyway. I got the diagnosis and I'm like, this makes so much sense. And I was already beginning my training as a cognitive hypnotherapist on the side. So when I had the realization, I'm sat there and I'm going, how do I want to spend the rest of my life? Because I don't want to spend the rest of my life doing what I'm currently doing, just shipping software. Software, it's a crazy thing to sell because there's nothing tangible. You can't touch anything. It's all the idea of value isn't, and I guess it's the same with performance coaching and men's performance coaching and what I do in my consultancy. Like, it's not tangible. You can't touch it. You can't take your shirt off and there's a six pack. There's no physical product, right? But I just remember going, I want to help people. And I know how I'm currently doing it is not it. So I thought I wanted to be a therapist. And as I did my 100 hours, I just started to notice I really struggled to check in with people that weren't ambitious because I was always ambitious. And so at that stage, I've been diagnosed. I was already training. And then I'm studying and then I'm learning about myself. And that's also part of why I decided to study full time, because I thought, well, I know if I invest 1 year, at least as a minimum, into myself, into my studies about cognitive therapy, NLP, performance coaching, but also studies on ADHD, on myself and how I think, feel, and operate. This year will change the whole trajectory and my whole life. So that's what I did. And that's exactly what happened. Now, I was very fortunate, right? Because I was a young guy without a partner or kids. A breakup happened just before the diagnosis, also interestingly. And that breakup was being driven by a lot of undiagnosed ADHD and there was a couple of values matches as well in there that we were slightly incompatible. But yeah, like it was from there. And then I already told you the story, just people started paying me and it started growing and it went from there. So the momentum that I've gathered has come post-diagnosis, not pre-diagnosis. I had momentum in the software sales role. I had some momentum in boxing. But yeah, everything that I've achieved now, just through mastering my mind, mastering my neurology, mastering like a lot of trauma, Jack. This is one thing that I think, and I work with most of my clients, and not all of them, but a lot of them are neurodiverse, whether that's ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyspraxia. Most entrepreneurs are wired slightly different, and that's what enables them to see the world differently, which enables them to solve problems differently. But I think just understanding, this is how my brain works. This is what keeps me engaged, and understanding all of that, but particularly on the ADHD side, like you pick up so much trauma around, and again, trauma doesn't have to be capital to T, I was kidnapped or anything like that. It can just be teachers just telling you again and again, why can't you sit still? Why can't you be more like your brother? Why can't you be more like this, like this, like this? Like there's so many moments that you just create this inherent insecurity. And every human being, regardless of neurology, is afraid of not being good enough, afraid of being unlovable and not enough, right? But with the ambitious entrepreneurs, they took those messages and said, fuck you, I'm going to prove you wrong. And then they get this big chip on their shoulder. And it works great because it enables you to push really, really, really hard until you burn out, or you burn out all of your personal relationships. You don't have any connection to what you're doing, and your whole identity is just built on one strand, which is business. And then a market changes, your business changes, and then your sense of self-worth just completely falls apart. So I think for me, it was the unpacking of the various moments in my life, from childhood through teenagehood, through all of it, that helped me accept myself, love myself, and then just become an absolute operator through changing my relationship with myself and reality. And then you obviously have the business systems that you can implement around you and yourself that then change everything else later on. But I would say like doing the deep emotional work alongside having the performance tools, which is what underpins my entire philosophy for what I do. That's what we teach in the coach certification. Like, it's all come through study and tinkering and toying and putting together a system, which, like, you can do the external practical heady stuff, but if you don't feel enough or feel unworthy, or you're anxious and overstimulated all the time, like, you're not going to be able to implement that. So you've got to have both halves, and they've got to hold hands, both as a practitioner delivering this kind of work, but then also as a client ready to receive. If you just go in thinking, I'll just put some systems in and that'll fix everything, no way. If you only think just therapy is going to fix the thing, that's not going to work either. Like, it's got to be both. And then you got the other argument, which is like, oh, well, I'll just take meds. Like, that's fine, but that's not going to change insecurity and doubt. That's also not going to help you be more efficient in your business. So kind of went around the houses there, but hopefully that kind of gives you a good picture.
Absolutely. And again, a kind of synergy there from a messaging and principles point of view. This is something that I too work on with my clients. And the way we describe it is the two halves of the solution ultimately. And I think sequencing is important. As you've mentioned there, my way of operating is we work on the personal operating system first. It's kind of the language that we use, and that's the entrepreneur behind everything. As you've said there, getting a better understanding of how our brain actually works, the wiring, what does this mean? What are the principles that I likely would be best operating by as an individual? And once we've gone through that process of getting a strong foundation, changing the beliefs and the identity that we have so that it is self-serving as opposed to self-deprecating, doing that foundational work. And then we add the infinite game of business on top, because if we're only focus on the redesign of a business, the implementations of business systems and structures that are, rightly so, designed around this brain time, you're still not going to execute on them because we haven't done that you work to begin with. So yeah, I am wholeheartedly in agreement with that. Now, there's a question I want to ask you, which I wasn't actually expecting to ask. It's just continue to be anchored in my mind from you mentioning it earlier, because I do want to get an insight into some of the tactics and strategies that you give your clients that we can maybe give the audience. So they're some of the ones that you found to be most powerful and prevalent for people who do have this brain type. But one thing that I see to be quite common in having these types of conversations with high performing, ambitious, ADHD type entrepreneurs, there seems to be this almost ever impending question or open loop that we find to be so greatly difficult to answer, which I've also experienced, which is what you mentioned earlier. How do I want to spend the rest of my life? Is this a good use of my time? Am I on the right track? That for me seems to be really common for, again, those of us that have this brain, because I believe we have such a wide field of view of the world as opposed to a narrow one, which then opens up that plane of thinking. If one of your clients was to come to you with that, maybe we call it an existential crisis, and I'm sure that's not uncommon, where they've probably created a level of success and then they start questioning, is this it? Is this what I want to be doing? How would you guide somebody through the process of answering that question?
Yeah, great catch. And most of my clients I've got two types of clients. I call it one's now what Nick, which is like more of that. I've achieved all of this, and I've got more money than ever, but what do I do with it? Like I'm just questioning what's the point or where am I going? And then I've got potential Peter, and these guys are already smashing it. Life's good. It's not really that. It's just how do I go from good to great, and that's a different conversation. But for the more existential question, yeah, I have one very simple frame, which is really simple, right? So let's say you came to me with that. I'd say, okay, Jack, if money didn't exist, how much of what you do on a daily basis would you still do? And if the answer is I wouldn't do any of this, then you say, okay, well, that tells me that you're struggling to connect and you're doing things that aren't sustainable. Now, we always have to go through life, and there are going to be periods of time where we can't operate like that. And there are different strands of life upon which we can't always just do things for the sake of doing them, right? That we have responsibilities that we have to stick to. But for me, mate, like this conversation we're having right now, if money didn't exist, I'd still have it. So I know I'm playing in the right arena. I know with all of my one-to-one clients, if money didn't exist, I'd still be playing in that arena. If money didn't exist, I'd still be teaching coaches that want to learn this type of work. Would I still do it? This is off the first cohort. I asked myself that question at the end. I said, yeah, that was amazing. And now we're helping those guys. Not only have they got certification, but they've got ongoing supervision for when they're unpacking some of the bigger emotional side of their clients or the performance side. And then we're helping them get their first 10 paid clients as well, specifically one-to-one performance coaches. And like seeing them, get their first few clients and seeing them get their first few breakthroughs. Like if money didn't exist, would I still be in the room and helping those people? The answer is yes. Same with my training. If money didn't exist, would I still box and still, or I can't really fight anymore, but if I could, if money didn't exist, would I still do this? Well, the answer is, yeah, I would. So that for me is always the question. And if the answer is no, then I say, okay, well, if money didn't exist, how would you like to spend your time? And some people say, oh, I want to sort of sip cocktails on the beach, but you can only do that for so long, particularly if you're ambitious. And then we do a bit of an energy audit. So it's what is energizing you: thoughts, feelings, habits, behaviors, beliefs, people, environments. What's draining you? And then we try and maximize, well, how can we get more of what's energizing you versus what's draining you? And then finally, beginning with the end in mind, like just run me through what would the perfect day, week, month, quarter, and year look like. So if we begin with the end in mind, and then we look at the present, and we understand, well, where are you being drained and where are you not being drained? And we look at, if money didn't exist, like what would you do? It just gives us a blueprint for us to reverse engineer from. And then, as in life, you look at your deck of cards, because everybody's dealt a different set of cards, and every time me and my clients rock up to a call, the decks, sometimes the same cards, sometimes the deck's been shuffled, and you just look at your cards and we go, okay, well, what cards have we got? What levers can we pull, whether that's internally or externally out in the world, that can take us towards that perfect life, that can take us towards a life full of things that you'd do if money didn't exist? You can't do that in 5 minutes. It's a journey, right? But that's really where I start. And once you have those two frames, the present and the future, then I might reverse engineer into, I can't possibly do that. Why not? I don't feel good enough. I don't feel worthy. Okay, where was that born in childhood? And then we start to listen and we start to reprocess and repack some of those thoughts, feelings, and beliefs using various different techniques that I have through cognitive therapy, through NLP, through all the other tools that I've picked up from my mentors. Then we're reprocessing things in the past that are holding you in the present, stopping you from going towards that future. So by working end to end, present, future, and past, it just enables us to free up the emotional, psychological resources to go and enjoy the journey more. Because there's other people where, like, if we look at autism, autists prefer to do the same thing again and again and again, and they like structure. They make great bodybuilders. They make great entrepreneurs, particularly in operations, where they can just do the same thing again and again and again. So there'll be some things we still need to reprocess, but we also need to help them set up a business or get clear on where it is they want to go within that neurology type. Where ADHD is, they need stimulus, they need new stuff. That's why I love the podcast, because we're always meeting new people and sharing ideas and going back and forth. I don't like operations, finance. I don't like any of those things. So then I have to re-engineer how I build my team and build my systems. But that's really how I answer that question. And then we can just reverse engineer who do you need to become, what needs to happen, what deadwood do you need to let go of, who do you need to hire, what systems you need to build, and then off it goes.
Love that. And I'm getting ahead of a answer that some people might give to that question that you've proposed. because again, I've asked this question many times and I encounter it as well, which is, I don't know. I don't know what I like doing, and I don't know what I would do if I didn't have the money. And my assumption is that the guidance would therefore be, well, your only job right now is to go and experiment and find out. Like, go and test out new things, go and give yourself permission to be in a state of play, go and try new sports, let's say, go and try new experiences and see with that energy audit, or see on that scale, like, what is lighting you up? What is tickling your brain? Because I think that I've found, if I've ever been in that state of uncertainty and not being able to answer that question, and I've recognized this to be true in like clients that I work with as well, it's typically because we're not doing enough experimentation to give ourselves the space to explore and figure out, like, what do I like doing? What actually lights me up? And that is a bit of a journey in itself. Would you say that's a place that you would take someone if they were to answer in that way?
Yeah, I mean, the energy audit will also, unless I get the energy audit back and there's like nothing's energizing me, then we don't have really any data. And then we've got to ask a couple of questions. Is depression slipping in? And that's a completely different, if you're not finding joy in anything at all, and the idea of the future is just completely black and you're completely stuck in the past, and you're struggling to even brush your teeth in the mornings, and nothing like that, that real gray filter, like living life with a really dark pair of sunglasses on. Like, that's a mental health issue. And I would refer that out to a therapist or a counselor. But let's say that's not the case, right? We run the energy audit and then we can start to see, these things are lighting you up. Okay, how can we create more opportunities and more chances for that? If there's very little on the energy audit, but they're not really in that dark sort of sunglasses lens worldview, I like to go into the past. What did you like as a kid? So for me, I loved gaming. I absolutely loved gaming, competitive gaming. Loved it. Absolutely loved it. So that's something which can turn into an addiction if I'm not careful. But I'm really fascinated by war games, military strategy games, those sorts of things. So if I'm feeling like I'm struggling to log out of the world, and sometimes I would just go and re-download an old game. I'll just go and spend an hour playing that game and just switching the frame. Right? So that's more from like a fun perspective, like outside of work. Boxing, I love watching boxing. Football fan, love Arsenal. That's one of the addictions I've chosen. I'm always looking up transfer news, all of it. Whatever's happening inside the club, inside and out, I want to know what's going on. So like going into childhood and saying, what did you like as a kid? Do you want to go try that again? And some things are like, no, I got a bad relationship with it. Some of those can be quite fun and engaging. Now, if it's from a business standpoint, then it's analyzing what was the best business you ever had? Or if they've never had a business, they want to start one. Okay, what was the best job you ever had? Okay, what was it? So for me, I remember in software sales, I used to hate the admin. I used to hate reporting. I used to hate everything other than being in front of clients. That was the only thing I loved. So I remember saying out loud to the VP of revenue, and I said, my perfect day was, what's that? You're never asking me for reports. I'm never inputting anything into the CRM. All I'm doing is talking to people. That's my dream. That would be my dream dream job, just in meetings or on calls. That's it. So you wouldn't be surprised to know that pretty much all I do, Jack, is speak to people on calls or in person or on stage or in podcasts. That's all I really do. It's the thing that I'm good at. And it's the thing that I enjoy. It's the thing that adds out value to the world and adds value to the company. Now, putting in all of the SOPs and the automations and the systems and the monthly financial reports, and can't stand it. Won't do it. I absolutely won't do it. So guess what? I have systems and team in place that enable me to stay in my field of genius. Is that more expensive than other entrepreneurs that can slog their way through those things? Absolutely, yeah. But do you know what's even more expensive? Burning out, making shit decisions because I'm emotionally volatile, making shit financial decisions, and hating the journey. That's the thing when you've got an ADHD brain, is your sense of fulfillment and satisfaction is a hell of a lot higher and needs to be higher than neurotypical people, because you just won't do it. You just won't. And that's the frustrating side of the ADHD. Like, I think sometimes just trying to sit down and like write things down. So that's always been a nightmare for me. Now I speak my things into existence. So I've got Dan in TMP. He's one of my partners. brought him in, or the only partner that's come in, and particularly on this education business, I speak to him and Fathom about the vision. I speak to him about ideas and where I believe we can take things. And then he and Fathom then take all of those ideas and build a series of systems and operations that then I log in and I'm like, oh, everything's in front of me. Brilliant. Okay, I've spoken this idea into existence. Same with Kirsten, like the best hire I ever made, full-time assistant. I was sat on a round table with Dan Priestley a couple of years ago, and I was telling him what I was up. I think it was 3 years ago. Anyway, telling him what I was up to, and he goes, "Oh, like, isn't your what about your assistant? Like, why can't she get on that faster?" And I was like, "Oh, well, she's working part time." And everyone in the room are like light years ahead of me in business and experience, in age. And I said, "Oh, they're working part time," and everybody's looking at me like, "Are you nuts?" And I went, "What do you mean?" And the guy next to me, fascinating guy, Adrian, he was trying to hire Richard Branson's assistant, and he was going to put multi six figures into her. And I was like, "Why are you going to pay her that for an assistant? I don't get that." And he said, "She can handle Richard, who's also ADHD, interestingly. If you can handle Richard, she can handle me. And she can handle me. Our companies are going to boom." And so the next day, went out. There was an agency that Dan recommended, and yeah, found Kirsten, and that also changed my life, and that also changed everything. So yeah, I'm going to be honest, Jack. I've forgotten the original question or the opening gambit.
Mate,
That's the journey I've taken you on, and hopefully I've answered it.
It literally perfectly takes me to one of the biggest kind of questions that I had and curiosities that I had that I wanted to ask you about. So perfect segue to it. I'm really curious to dive a little bit deeper into what you've just mentioned there, if you're happy to do so, because one of the greatest journeys that I've been on and continue to explore, and I think it'll be a never ending journey. And this is a large portion of what I'm working on with like the audience and my clients. And this is the lens that I don't think is spoken about enough when it comes to business. And that is what this podcast is bred from, and what I'm really looking at trying to bring to the audience is these tactical changes that we can make so that we can try and get a peek under the hood, a look behind the curtain as to how does Kieran actually operate in his business with him knowing that he has a brain type like this. Because everybody that I speak to has that has the awareness that they have this brain and is running a high performing business, has made specific adjustments so that they can be seated in their zone of genius, as you mentioned earlier, rather than constantly putting out fires and fighting against their brain, swimming against the tide, as I often say. So if you're happy to do so, could you give us an insight into maybe the top 3 things, whether that be systems, adjustments that you've made? Obviously, you've mentioned about hiring a full-time assistant. If there's anything that you've specifically got off your plate that you're like, that has been a game changer for me to now be positioned in what I see as my area of genius. Because exactly as you've said, from my understanding from listening to you today and following you for a number of years, you seem to be a visionary, highly creative, the ability to be like phenomenal at articulating your ideas, but struggle with, like myself, the operational side of things, the tasks that require repetitive, like low volume work or high volume work. It's more the frequent things than the one-off big projects. I find that I'm very good at those, not very good at daily outreach, let's say. I'm really curious if you can get tactical on that, what maybe the top 3 have been for you.
Yeah. Number one, definitely the full-time assistant. I'll never forget being sat around that table and everyone looking at me like, "Oh, he hasn't figured this out yet." I remember but they're the best moments because they're the moments you learn as an entrepreneur. And I personally live for those moments. A lot of people experience like embarrassment or shame. For me, I'm just like, oh, like smack my head. And I like those moments. So yeah. And even then, I've been quite lucky with Kirsten because she's not really an assistant. She was a creative director at a marketing agency, and she just didn't like agency side. So she wanted a bit more of a generalist role. But because she's trained in managing campaigns, managing clients, she can edit content and put together schedules, and she's amazing. But on top of that, she also pulls together all the operational side, whether that's onboarding, setting up new platforms, whether that's adjust. So yeah, I think for me, it was just finding the second part of my brain that I was bad at and all the things I was inconsistent with. So hiring an assistant and a right hand that can cover ideally marketing and operations for me, game changer, changed my life. Yeah. Even just things like travel, like being able to go, right, I've got a client consultancy day in Vienna, like I did a few weeks ago. Here are the dates. I want a really beautiful location that's got lots of light, that's got whiteboards, it's got everything that I need. And I don't want to be more than a 20, 30-minute walk from the venue. Boom, rock into our next meeting. Okay, here's 6 venues for the place. Here's 6 venues for you to stay. Here's all the location. Here's this. Here's the flights. And I just go, yep. That one. She goes away and books it, and then I just rock up. Right, that took me 5 minutes. Boom. So simple, so easy. Whereas if I'm doing it, I'm like, should it be this one? Should it be this one? What about the price of this? And should I fly at this time? Should I fly at that time?
The cognitive load that takes up if you're doing it yourself versus getting your assistant or someone else or an automation to do it for you, I think is probably one of the biggest benefits, right? Is that you want to be using all of your bandwidth for the shit you are very good at doing. And that just saves the bandwidth being leaked.
Yeah. Honestly, man, like sometimes I work with coaches that are a little bit earlier on in their journey, or entrepreneurs that are a little bit, and they're hesitant to make that financial leap of hiring someone full time. And if they are an ADHDer, I just say to them, it will be the best investment you make. You hire the right person that's experienced and that can handle you and can actually build the SOPs for you. If you need to build all of the SOPs, and there'll be some that you do need to build, it's gonna be hard, right? But if you can find that person, honestly, like life changer. I felt like I was doing business on hard mode with ADHD, and then I felt like I was doing business on hard mode. I an unconscious handbrake on. I'm driving around with a handbrake that I could have just easily have lifted. That was the one. So that was the first one. Number 2, just operating in my zones of genius. So it also depends on where you're at in the business stage. So if you're in the experimentation phase of trying to figure out what's working and what's not, and what the product or service is and for what market that it is, then you're going to have to fuck around with things you don't enjoy to try and understand how to get that to work. It's like there's that element. But with that, sometimes you just got to David Goggins it. It's not sustainable for the long run, but there are moments where you've got to kind of fight with your neurology to get that done, if you don't have the bandwidth or the financials just yet to invest in a team or people around you to help get that out. And that's always going to be like dragging your nails down a chalkboard. Like, if you want to achieve something, sometimes you've just got to earn the right to be able to bring on someone that can do, the other parts, and you just got to scrap and fight with that. But otherwise, if you're in a place where actually I know what I'm good at, I know what drives this business forward, and this is my contribution towards that, then it really is identifying what is the 20% that generates the 80% of results, and then being disciplined to stay in that field of genius. It's being not afraid to let some plates smash and drop, because they will help you realize, that's an SOP that needs to be designed to be handed off to the team. Even now, I don't even design SOPs. Kristen handles them. I say, we need an SOP for this. Can you go and build it? She'll go and build it. She'll present it to me. And then I'll speak out loud and I'll say, that doesn't quite look right. We need to adjust this. Or I'll test it myself and I'll say, okay, can we make that adjustment? She makes that adjustment, all done. So identifying your zone of genius and what drives the business forward, and having the courage, the absolute courage to go and do more of that at the expense of the other things that your brain is screaming at you is important, but isn't really. I would say is number 2. Number 3 is also playing with things that you enjoy, and that it's kind of the same as number 2. So feel free to call me out and say that's a cop out, mate. But I'll give you an example, right? If believe it or not, I barely try in my content. And I think actually some people look at it. I've got clients that are very in the content game, and they could say that's very obvious, but I don't really try, because I struggle to sit down and write and concentrate. So writing isn't really my thing. I tried 6 months of doing reels, but sitting down to write scripts and sitting down to organize all of that never really worked. I was never consistent with it. But what I have always been consistent with is podcasts and speaking to people, and I enjoy it. And I like to think eventually I got good at them. And So I can just keep doing that. So from a marketing standpoint, I know that if I speak on stage and I do enough podcasts and people spend enough time with me and they listen and they pick things up, that will help. I mean, most of my business comes through referrals. It doesn't really come through digital channels. It will help. And if I just keep pulling those levers and keep delivering results with my clients and bringing people into my world and listening, I'm good at that. I enjoy that. So I can play that game for a long time. Whereas pushing on, say, reels or carousels or what, I can't do that. We've got one guy in the TMP Coach Collective. This guy's got hundreds of thousands of followers, and his background before he qualified as a mental performance coach was actually in cinematography. So guess what? He loves it. He loves coming up with real ideas. He loves coming up with carousels. So for him, and the way in which he will find his clients and build his business is through playing that game that he's very good at, very talented at, and that he loves it. So he can just keep playing in that field. I can't do that because he asked me, he's like, I think I could help you. And I said, you definitely could, but I know my brain and I just wouldn't, I wouldn't be able to have that level of consistency and attention to detail. And I don't enjoy that process. Now, I think that's quite unique to ADHD and hunter brains is you need to love that bit, because if you don't love it, you just have no interest. So I would say that's the third thing. That's more of a marketing piece. Try and find a way of marketing. Now, something that me and Kirsten do is I'm actually playing with this, and it'd be great if you called in one day. I'm about to start something called TMP Radio. Love radio, love speaking. A friend of mine owns a radio studio and a podcast studio too. And I said, I want to run a radio show 1 hour a week. I want to get people to dial in and just sort of see what happens. So what we'll do is we'll edit that show. Kirsten will then, I've got like 5 different topics I'm going to talk about. And Kirsten will then take those 5 topics and then she's going to turn them into carousels or emails, or she's basically going to take that raw edit, present me a load of content, and then that will go out for all the channels. So what have I done? I've showed up in front of camera. I've got some ideas I want to talk about. I've got some people dialing in, and she will then take me just speaking to the camera, and then she'll put that into content and then goes out. So now, could that content be a million times better at another different league and level if I really dived in? Yeah, absolutely. But an ugly phrase, I've got to piss with the cock that I've got, right? No point peering over the urinal and going, this guy's amazing at reels or this guy's amazing at writing. It's like, well, what am I good at and what do I enjoy? So I will play within that sphere and get as good as I can at that, and then refine that and just keep doing that until either A, I fall out of love with it, or B, it doesn't work anymore. And if that happens, then it's all right. Well, what's something else that I love that works, that will drive whatever company I'm building forward? And that's kind of the mindset of how I'm looking at the problems and playing with them.
I love that. And this is a journey that I've been on over the past year, I would say. Really is, because I've been in business for 10 years now. I've been online for like literally the first March of COVID. So obviously you're forced into the world of digital marketing then, and it was like very new and following trends, doing everything you can to do what you're meant to do, air quotes, in order to build a business, right? Constantly peering over the fence, looking at, well, what are they doing? Well, I need to do that. And I've done everything from like being on the real hamster wheel, which like I just resented for such a long period of time, to writing like daily emails, to blog posts, to everything you can think of, right? YouTube videos. And since this realization and since trying to optimize on like what actually works for my brain, what do I believe I'm good at / enjoy doing more of? Because again, a belief that I personally have is that those that win in business are just in business for the longest, because the equity that you build up in your brand over that period of time is often what does a large portion of the heavy lifting. I've seen you operate for years now. So instantly, even if we've never truly spoken, that is a huge signal of credibility because you're still fucking here. So it's like, that's how I operate, right? Because I'm sure we've both seen it. How many people have come and gone? How many, even just in this small echo chamber of the world that we live in with coaches and consultants? So many. So for me, taking that opinion and belief that I have, I want to just always be in the game. And thus I need to be doing things that allow me to stay in the game for a long period of time. And I really love that radio idea. I know naturally anyway, from a strategic point of view, the longer form live streaming element of the digital marketing world is massively on the rise, and probably where everything is going. But I think more to that is that you are choosing a vehicle or method or whatever language you'd like to use that works best for you. And then you are building around that, building the infrastructure, the systems around that for, in this case, distribution. For me, that's made a massive difference over the past, even just 6 months, where I've looked at what's that for me, very similar to you, podcasts. I do 2 podcasts/YouTube videos a week. That's that's my main hero piece of content. Everything that then happens is just downstream from that. So it's systems, structure, AI, and bodies to help redistribute that everywhere. Because one thing that I love doing is creating like once. Whilst I'm like in the zone, I've got like a really great idea. It's like I want to just create that once. I hate the idea of then having to repeat that idea over and over again in different formats manually. So I've obviously tried to build a system that means I have a singular input that, like you have just said there, can get repurposed in many different ways without you having to do that yourself manually. And that has been a game changer because it's just massively spiked my level of enjoyment towards doing the work. And that's so important because, like you said, I think people with a hunter brain are very feelings orientated. And if I have this resistance to doing something and I don't like it, let's say, I find it really, really difficult to continue to push through. And I know that sounds, to anybody that doesn't have this brain type, can sound very fickle and can sound like it's a discipline problem. I can do it and I have done it for years. But the pain that I experience from doing that, I believe, is significantly higher than a neurotypical person doing something that they don't enjoy doing. And I feel it like viscerally. And then that just clouds everything that I do because I'm like, I hate my business because I don't like doing this thing. And that is, as my listeners will know, why I closed down my previous business. Because I was like, I hate this. I just don't like, I'm doing all the operations. I've spent 6 figures on mentorships, consultants, coaches, etc. over the past 5 years. And I built their business and they don't have the same brain as me. And I was like, I understand now why everything felt so difficult and wasn't enjoyable for me. Is because I was basically running my business in the complete opposite way to how my brain actually wanted it to work, with Loom check-ins and small frequent inputs and all of these things. And obviously now in my current business, it's designed specifically around how that works, and just how I feel operating in my business is completely different. So I just wanted to reaffirm that that's also something I've gone through, and I think for anyone that's listening can genuinely be a game changer, is to just redesign the business and your systems around how you actually operate as opposed to how you think you should operate or how other people operate.
Yeah, without a doubt. And that goes as, like, if I look at one of the biggest coaching values and consultancy values I have is be water. So you adapt to what's in front of you, right? So regardless as to whether somebody has ADHD or autism or neurotypical, like every single brain, this is a crazy thing, right? You've got the neurology, so you've got the brain, and you've got all the neurochemicals that are flying around, the electrical impulses, and how that all comes together. And then you have the mind. A lot of people point to the mind up in the head, but it's not, because we experience memories and we experience reality in our bodies too. You can think of certain memories that I say, what feeling do you feel and where in your body would you point? And some people got my upper right ab. So every human being has a unique algorithm, a unique hardware and software from which they are interpreting their reality. And if you can really understand your own algorithm, your own mind, and how you experience reality, and make the appropriate adjustments in the way in which you think and the way in which you feel, not only are you going to move through your reality more efficiently, not only are you going to feel more calm and more clear, but you're just going to get more done. And if you get more done on the right things and the right trajectory and the right journey, like in business specifically, you're going to make more money and it's going to be more enjoyable and you're going to get the right outcomes for everyone involved. And if you can create that world where it's win-win-win for everyone you come into, it's win-win-win, regardless of scarcity or competition or insecurities or doubts or fears. If you can truly master your central nervous system and your brain and your mind and how you feel, and you realize there's enough to go around for everyone. I am enough. I can do this. And everything is win-win-win. It's fine. But it's only when you have a really fast mind that you haven't mastered and you've got feelings and emotions that are clouding your judgment. That is what leads to unforced errors in business and life. And sometimes it isn't actually being a better winner. It's about minimizing unforced errors. And if you're an ADHDer, as you know, the ability to create unforced errors is very high. And that's one of the things I work with on clients, is helping them avoid unforced errors. And I've been very lucky to have mentors in my corners, venture capitalists or business consultants that saw me as a teenager and went, I like this kid. I want to help him. And through years and years and years of just asking them questions, they've helped me avoid unforced errors and helped me recognize that my feelings are just feelings. They're just emotions. They're not real. And actually, there are moments to use my intuition, even though the data suggests not. And then there are other moments where you got to look at the data, you got to look at your spreadsheets, you got to look at the market, and you got to go, maybe that's not the best move, And it's that dance in between of understanding what's a signal and what's noise. And that's where I like to play. I love to play in that place of dialing down the noise and looking at the signals and moving in the appropriate directions. If any of that made any sense and wasn't just an existential navel gazing rant.
No, I love that. I also love the frame, which I've not heard of before, of outside of obviously tennis, is like trying to remove or minimize the unforced errors as much as possible. And that's a really nice frame to adopt, is that we actually often don't need to, especially in the world of business, right? We often don't need to do these huge, but we'll have these huge moments, these huge transformational moments where in one fell swoop, we've completely changed the business, or we completely took over the marketplace, or, it's this one moment of genius. It's often actually just being consistent at doing the simple, effective work, as everybody knows, right? Which again sounds like trite at this point. So therefore, how do we keep ourselves in a continuous state of momentum to do that? And it is to remove the frequency of unforced errors, which often stops us being in momentum. And then we have to move the car from that standstill position again, which I think for ADHD entrepreneurs and hunter brains, that's the exhausting thing, is the flip-flopping from being in momentum to being out of momentum and having to get going again. I think for a lot of people, that is where it feels so tiresome, obviously alongside the contributing factor of the internal dialogue that comes along with that, berating ourselves. Now, to wrap this up, I've got 2 questions before we dive into what you're working on at the moment. Just whatever comes to your mind first off, almost just like quick fire. What do you believe is one thing that everyone should do better to manage their ADHD or to get more performance from their brain? If you were to leave people with one hack that you have either done yourself or you've given someone else, what comes to mind?
Yeah, it's a frame called The Driver in the Car. Are you familiar with this frame?
Don't believe so.
Okay. So I want you to imagine, are you an F1 guy? Or not really, but can you play with the metaphor?
I can play with the metaphor, and I'm aware my family are F1 heavy.
Okay. So here's how I look at, say, an ADHD brain and a neurotypical brain. An ADHD brain is like an F1 car. It can be really fast, really amazing, right? But it's highly sensitive and it almost needs conditions to be perfect for it to perform. Otherwise, it's going to fall apart. A neurotypical brain is a bit more like a tractor, right? You can put it over, you can put it on the road, you can put it over like really bumpy terrain, or like a tank, right? You can put it more like a tank. It can just deal with those things a lot easier. So this isn't just for ADHD, but this is the metaphor that I used to understand myself and understand my brain and the sensitivity that we've got. You've got the car and you've got the driver. So the car is your body. Has it got the right fuel? Are you eating well enough? Are you hydrated enough? Are you eating well enough? Are you training enough? Are you sleeping enough? Because all of my ADHD goes out the window when I'm not looking after the car. So before I go into thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, before I go into challenging emotions, childhood upbringing, before I go into any of that, all I'm listening for is the first thing I just say to clients and myself is, how's my sleep, my nutrition, my training, my hydration? How's all of that stuff first? Because all of that stuff's out. We haven't got a driver issue. We haven't got anything going on. You just need to sort that out. And often the time that sorts out a lot. But if all of that's all good, then we've got a driver issue. So if the car is just the machine upon which you operate through the map or the racetrack, the driver is the individual that has the thoughts, the feelings, the beliefs. You can have the fastest car in the world, but if that guy doesn't believe in himself, or if that guy is overly triggered by something that someone said, which happens with particularly with ADHD and conflict and rejection, sensitivity, and all these things, right, that happen in business. Well, then you got to work on the driver. You got to work on, well, how is he thinking and feeling, and how do we help him make better decisions and calm him down and focus him more? So I would say that's that metaphor. Whenever your ADHD is spinning out, was hang on, have I got a driver issue right now? Have I got a car issue right now? If it's a car issue, like I often don't eat enough, so I've got a meal prep company that delivers my meals in the morning every single day, so I can just go into the fridge and pull out the box and eat. And sometimes even then, I still miss a meal or two, and I got to catch myself if my ADHD gets worse and look after that. But if the answer is no, then I've got a driver issue. Then I just call one of my mentors. I raise my hand and ask for help. I'm like, right, stuck on this problem, need some help. Can you either A, ask me some diagnostic questions, or B, if you feel like you know what the answer is, can you help me see what I can't see? And then that will just calm the driver down, and then away we go.
I love that. I love that as a frame because it allows us to have that almost decision-making matrix, because it could be a plethora of things, right? Why am I stuck right now? Why am I at what I call like a chaos ceiling, either personally or within my business? And it can feel so overwhelming because, the deeper you go with the hunter brain ADHD, the more you recognize that there are so many moving parts and so many factors. So that's a really nice distinction to be able to make. And I'm sure as you use that more frequently, you will become more fine-tuned at being able to diagnose which of the two is it. Is it a vessel challenge, or is this an internal challenge, like a driver challenge, as you said there? And then have almost like a menu of things that you can do on either side that are the typical culprits. So I'm exactly the same with the food, which I also have a meal prep company just to eliminate the need for me to remember and have some form of external system that does the remembering for me. Yeah, I love that.
There's another frame I'd love to throw in there quickly. We've got
Please
time.
do. Yeah,
which
yeah.
is, I experience what I call ADHD attacks. So what an ADHD attack to me looks like is, imagine you've got 20 tabs open on Chrome and somebody's hitting change tab every 5 to 10 seconds. So I will start one task and then I'm started another task and then I've started another task and I start to become paralyzed, and I sometimes literally walking around my house getting confused as to what room I'm in and why did I walk into that room and what's going on. And sometimes they can get so bad. All I needed to do that morning was go to the gym, and I have been paralyzed, absolutely paralyzed by what I call an ADHD attack. And then I become anxious and then become overwhelmed. And then by that point, I've just got to get out of the house and go for a walk and leave all my devices at home to try and calm myself down. That I still experience those today. That doesn't go away. Usually if I'm changing time zones. So let's say I've been in America or Europe, and my body clock's completely screwed, and I haven't been eating enough, and I've been working hard, and that's when that can happen. Or if I've got too many calls or projects on the go. So what I do is driver or car, try and manage the car, and then get the driver in control. But I've used a frame called the ADHD stock price. So in stock trading, when in doubt, zoom out, right? So if you're looking at the last 24 hours of your performance stock price and you've seen a massive drop, you're going to panic. But if you zoom out and look at where you were 7 years ago at this point with the same thing, you're actually miles ahead. So you're still growing. There's been a slight dip in the stock price. So by recognizing and accepting the dip of your performance stock price, it's then going, okay, well, what can I do to kind of blunt out this steep curve? And then you start working your way up. Your performance stock price or your ADHD stock price, you're going to have days where it's on the up and it's trending. You're going to have days where it feels like the whole market has crashed. But we'll just zoom out and you can say it out loud. All right, the performance stock price or the ADHD stock price is down today. Cool. What levers can I pull to try and bump that up? So when in doubt, zoom out. So that's the second frame I would say is really helpful for sure for me and my clients.
Brilliant. I love that. That is super helpful. And again, something that I'm sure we all struggle with, myself included, where we have those bad brain days and you're then heavily judging your performance and your sense of meaning. And going back to what we were saying at the start, right, bringing it full circle. Am I good enough? Am I cut out for entrepreneurship? I've had a day where I've not performed. I've struggled to get into the work today. I've struggled to be creative. And if you're zoomed in, you will then tarnish yourself with that brush across the whole of your career. So I think that's a really helpful frame, is to, like, as you say, zoom out and see the overall trajectory. It's that actually, where am I even in, comparison to last year? What have I acquired? What am I now able to do? So I love that. Final question. What's the best book or podcast that you've listened to or have recommended the most over the past 24 months?
So I've got this thing. I don't read many books, but I'll read the same book 3 or 4 or 5 times. I'll internalize the book and I'll turn it into my internal code, and uh, I'll do something with it. I think a lot of people read books almost kind of like Netflix, and nothing really goes in, and they don't test the principles and they don't really understand it. So whenever I make a book recommendations with clients, I make it with the recommendation that this should shake their world. So I take this question very seriously. For ADHD, The Drummer on the Great Mountain, phenomenal book, changed my whole life. I've probably sent maybe 100 copies of that book. God knows what the CO2 emissions is on that, because it's a thick, heavy book. It's a thick, heavy book. But yeah, so for ADHD, The Drummer on the Great Mountain. For business, 10x is easier than 2x. Could go into thinking and reality and existential philosophy. Like there is so many, like there's a few I could put out there, but I just think for your audience of ADHD business owners, those two, I've probably sent a couple 100 copies of those.
Amazing. Is that the Dan Sullivan
Yeah.
one? Yeah. If you were to, even for myself, throw in some of those maybe transurfing ones, what would they be?
Somebody Should Have Told Us by Jack Pransky. That's about thinking. That's all about none of your experience is real. It's just your relationship with your thoughts that is creating your experience. And you can change your thoughts. So if you can change your thoughts or not identify with your thoughts, thus you're able to surrender to reality. And then just on that topic, if your beliefs are just a series of thoughts all attached to a bigger thought. So you can change your thoughts, you can change your beliefs, you can change your beliefs, you can change your outcomes. But yeah, that book is that's well fun, and it's one of those obscure books. Like it's like got a really old cover, and like nobody really knows too much about it. But it's one of those ones you like. My God, it's like a vintage bottle of wine that's been sat on the shelf for years that no one picked up. That's a nice one, I'd say.
So that is right up my street. That's the type of stuff that I love diving into, even if the audience are not necessarily ready for that type of work yet. That is how I love spending my time. Me and Louis often talk about books like that. I'm actually getting a train up to Manchester on Friday to go and see him. So yeah, I roll my sleeves up and dive into that one. But mate, this has been an incredible podcast today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your super busy schedule and hopping on here today. Tell people, where can they find out more about yourself and what is it that you're working on at the moment?
Yeah, well, look, it's been a pleasure and an honor, mate. I've been looking forward to this conversation, and yeah, great fun. And it's just a different frequency, different frequency to talk more about this stuff. And I think what you're doing is amazing. So please keep bringing these conversations to the world, because yeah, like people need to know they're not alone. It's not just them. That you're not broken. Your brain isn't broken. You've just got an F1 car and you're trying to put it around, the M25, and you're trying to figure out why everyone's faster than you and why you're having issues and why you're always spinning out. So yeah, these conversations help people get control of their car and put them on the right track, so then they can fly around the track. So yeah, thank you for what you're doing. In terms of yeah, look, if you listen to this and if you're a coach, founder, executive, or entrepreneur, and you're thinking, oh, I really resonate with that guy, I would like to learn a little bit more so I can work just on mental performance, the way in which I think and feel. You can head to Kieran O'Neill, Kyran O'Neill, ONEILL.com, and just click apply. And we can book a discovery call and we can explore that. If you're a coach and you're thinking, I want to learn how to do what Kieran does, and I'm really fascinated by that, and I want to go deeper with my one-to-one clients, but I don't quite have the skill set or the resources just yet to take clients there. Our next intake is in April. So if you just head to @Total Mental Performance on Instagram, and either drop me a DM, just reference this podcast, or I think there's a waiting list link in there. Head there, and then you'll be able to get more details on when that's coming out. So not only will you learn performance frameworks like some of the frames I've shared today, but it's actually learning tools and techniques to help people unpack challenging emotions and memories in childhood. That's going to help them let go and reframe, so then they can think, feel, and perform on another level. So if you want to check that out, that's all there too. And we'll have to get you on our podcast at some point, just Total Mental Performance Podcast. You can search that on any channel there.
Amazing. And I'll put all the links in the show notes to all of the resources, the websites, your socials, so everybody can go check them out. And I urge them to, and to check out the podcast as well. And I'll definitely be calling in and listening to the TMP radio when it is up. But mate, been a pleasure today, even just selfishly for myself, to ask some of the questions that have been on my mind for a while. Great to have you on, and I think people are going to get a ton of value out of this today. So thank you.
A pleasure and honor, Jack. Cheers, mate.